Geoff Arbuckle, age 48. He's the host of something called Monster Mondays, a podcast airing worldwide where he likes talking about horror, sci-fi, and anything that might go bump in the night. This week, he is about to take a detour. His destination is comprised of 3 stops along the path of the Twilight Zone. It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Yes, it's time to return to Rod Serling's seminal work, The Twilight Zone. Yes, I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch right here on filmseizure.com each Wednesday. And most of you know The Twilight Zone. I mean, even if you haven't really ever watched any episodes, you at least know the theme. And if not the whole theme, you know the very beginning of the theme that conjures the other thing you likely know about the show already. It's often spooky or strange, playing on irony or nightmarish scenarios that trap people in the namesake of the series. A place where you can't quite tell what's real and what's madness. And I've covered an episode before, the famous William Shatner episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, where Shatner is a man flying home from being treated for a mental breakdown only to discover he's in for a whole new nightmare when he sees a gremlin on the wing messing with the engines of the plane. So I've likely mentioned during that episode that The Twilight Zone, the original, ran for 5 seasons from October 1959 to June 1964 for a grand total of a whopping 156 episodes. I mean, it was a smash success, and during its time, it influenced other shows like The Outer Limits and Thriller being the one that was hosted by Boris Karloff. But one show I think some people mistake for being influenced by The Twilight Zone is One Step Beyond. That show actually started about 9 months before The Twilight Zone, but I digress. Now, throughout all of those episodes of The Twilight Zone, many have become favorites of fans young and old. The massive popularity of the series and individual episodes themselves have led to now decades-long tradition of the Sci-Fi Channel, or whatever it wants to call itself now, to have a New Year's marathon of episodes. And there's certainly a reason why the series outperformed and outlasted its contemporaries in the spooky horror or sci-fi anthology business. And that's what we're looking at today, are 3 episodes that either often land among the favorite of fans or they're just downright memorable. I'm actually going to go backwards in the order in which they aired, but I'll start with Living Doll. Then I'll discuss It's a Good Life, and I'll round out this episode's trio of Twilight Zone goodness with The Hitch-Hiker. And when I get to my usual 3 likes for these, I'll reserve 1 like for each episode. So let's get started with Season 5's Living Doll. The episode starts off with Annabelle telling her daughter, Christy, that she needs to go upstairs with her gift that she got for her at the store before she shows her stepfather what was bought for her. And when they go inside, Eric, played by the always awesome Telly Savalas, is curious what was bought and downright frustrated at the potential of the expenditure. You see, Eric is a bit of a grumpy guy, so much so that Christy feels rejected by him because he's actually a stepfather to her, and his relationship with Annabelle is strained. But after being a jerk to his stepdaughter, Eric approaches the Talkie Tina doll that Annabelle bought for Christy and turns the key to make the doll talk. Now, Talkie Tina introduces herself to the grumpy man and then proclaims that she doesn't think she likes him. In fact, she thinks that she could even hate him. And when Eric throws the doll against the wall, Talkie Tina says he'll be sorry. And when Eric tries to show Annabelle that Talkie Tina is mean to him, the doll just says her normal, warm, loving message of introducing herself as Talkie Tina and saying, "And I love you," instead of all the things that she had said to the mean Eric previously. Now, the relationship is strained because Eric claims that he can't love Annabelle's daughter because he's incapable of doing so because he and Annabelle can't have children of their own. He has a great deal of insecurity over their inability to have children. I think it's more or less implied that he's the reason they can't have children. Now, what's definitely explicitly shown is that Talkie Tina speaks and threatens Eric, and he can't prove it to Annabelle that this doll is antagonizing him. Now, he thinks it's Annabelle and Christy setting him up. He thinks that they put something into the doll to say these things to him. And when he tries to throw Talkie Tina away, she warns once again that he'll be sorry. And sure enough, she calls him on the phone and tells him she is going to kill him. Now, later, Eric finds Talkie Tina in bed with Christy when she should have still been in the trash. But he believes it's Christy who's speaking through the Tina doll in some way and threatening him through it. And after telling the little girl that, he's not her daddy, he takes the doll to his workshop where he tries to crush her head in a vise. He's surprised to find that she is not reacting to pain as she did earlier when he teased her with the light to his cigarette. So he decides to use a saw to try to cut her head off, but he's unable to cut through the doll. Annabelle tries to stop him, but he tells her to basically leave him alone, and shockingly, he can't seem to kill this doll that is threatening to kill him. So he puts it in a bag, ties it up, and puts it into the garbage can, and puts bricks on the lid to keep that garbage can shut. Now, Annabelle threatens to leave Eric, but he appeases her by returning Tina to Christy. But Talkie Tina, though, well, she's not going to forgive as easily. Despite reuniting his stepdaughter with her beloved doll, Tina still decides to deal with Eric herself. And in the middle of the night, Eric is awoken by the sound of the doll moving on her own throughout the house. Annabelle says that she's not hearing anything, but he decides to go and investigate anyway. And as he goes downstairs to find the source of the sound, he steps on Talkie Tina on one of the steps, causing him to fall down the stairs to his death. When Annabelle picks up the doll, Talkie Tina tells her that she had better be nice to her. Now, our next stop along the path of the Twilight Zone is one of the most popular episodes of the entire run and was adapted by Joe Dante for Twilight Zone, the movie. We are going to Peaksville, Ohio, so that we can find out if it's a good life. Now, Rod Serling tells all about how Peaksville, Ohio suddenly shut itself off to the outside world. In fact, there may not be any outside world beyond the border of Peaksville. And there are no more cars, no electricity, no stores that can bring in more stock to the general stores inside the town. No real modernity whatsoever anymore. Now, and that's all because of a monster that now resides in this quiet Midwest town. Mr. and Mrs. Fremont own a farm, and the monster lives on the Fremont's farm, in the farmhouse, and it's 6-year-old Anthony Fremont, their son. You see, this monster seems like a perfectly normal little boy, but he has a terrible power. His Aunt Amy was originally able to control the monster, but she absentmindedly forgot that he doesn't like when people are singing, and when she was singing aloud, Anthony basically, it's implied that he kind of turned her into a smiling simpleton. Everyone in the town of Peaksville, Ohio must smile and think only happy thoughts, because if they don't, little Anthony can wish them into a cornfield or turn them into a grotesque version of their former selves. Now, speaking of monstrosities, a delivery boy comes along to the Fremont farm, and Anthony shows him a creation of his, a 3-headed gopher that he ultimately grows tired of and kills, freaking out the delivery boy. Now, Mrs. Fremont, who's played by Cloris Leachman, by the way, tells the delivery boy that he doesn't have to be frightened of Anthony because Anthony likes this guy. But she also tells him that Anthony created an animal the day before that tried to bite him. And she kind of hoped that it would have, but she has to kind of shut that thought out of her mind. Mrs. Fremont constantly tries to remind Aunt Amy and the others in this town that it's a real good thing that Anthony does the things that he does, no matter what. Everything is just as it should be. It's never too hot. It's never wrong that Anthony went into the barn to see the cow, or that he apparently turned the pigs that his father had into grotesque monster things. And later, Anthony tells his father that, there's no kids that come over to play with them today. And Mr. Fremont reminds him that the last kids who came to play with him were all wished into the cornfield. So the town is kind of being held hostage by this little kid, and members of the town come over to the Fremonts to watch television. And by that, I mean that Anthony creates television programs. That night, they watch a movie about dinosaurs, which, quite honestly, I'd be kind of into, but regardless, while one of the members of the town is playing the piano for everyone, and by everyone, I mean mostly for Anthony, another person at the get-together whose actual birthday it is, and it was kind of a surprise birthday party for him too, starts making noise. And Anthony doesn't like noise when the music is playing, but this guy won't shut up about how little whiskey is still available in this town. He's getting drunk on the brandy that someone gave to him for his birthday. He starts making demands about what he wants to hear on the piano, despite everyone begging him to stop talking. And he ends up calling Anthony a monster and a murderer. So Anthony turns the guy into a jack-in-the-box that he then, at the request of Mr. Fremont, wishes into the cornfield. And while the remaining people of Peaksville desperately hang on to positive thoughts during the course of this madness at this party, Anthony makes it snow, which will ruin most of the crops that is used to feed the survivors of Peaksville. Now, our third episode is another great that has a life of its own. The 16th episode of the series, the very first season, we have The Hitch-Hiker. As the story starts, we meet Nan Adams, a vacationing buyer for a major retail store. She's actually driving cross-country on her vacation from New York to California. In Pennsylvania, she had an incident involving a flat tire. In fact, she is told how lucky she is that she didn't get into anything worse with how she skidded out and lost control of the vehicle until it somehow came to a stop safely on the shoulder on the side of the road. Now, she gets that fixed, but as she drives off to follow the roadside tire guy to his station to get a brand new tire put on, she sees a man hitchhiking on the side of the road. And while she is at the station, she is then surprised to see the same man in the reflection of her mirror thumbing the direction that he's going. However, the service station attendant didn't see him. And 50 miles later, she sees the hitchhiker again, and then yet again, every stop that she makes. Nan narrates her fear of how the same man is always ahead of her, and she feels like she's kind of losing her mind or in great danger, one or the other. Now, as Nan continues her drive, she is more and more unnerved. She even expresses to the cook at the diner that she is starting to hate her car, and she's just simply tired. But she feels like she has to continue on, that nothing can stop getting her to her destination. But as she stops at a road's construction site, the hitchhiker steps up to the window of her car to ask if she's headed west. And after exclaiming that no, she's not, she hurriedly drives around the barrier to get away from him. Later, she sees him again as she is waiting at a railroad crossing, and to escape him this time, she nearly gets hit by the train when her car stalls on the tracks. Nan now thinks the hitchhiker wanted her to die. She thinks that he knew she would try to escape him, and only to basically lure her onto the tracks as the train was coming toward her. And she ponders if she should turn back, because what's ahead will only be desperately lonely stretches of road in the middle of nowhere. But she presses on anyway. Late at night in New Mexico, 6 days after she first saw the hitchhiker, her car came to a stop out of gas, and she tries to getting help from a closed gas station whose owner basically tells her he's closed. She has to come back in the morning. But a sailor from San Diego arrives and says that he'll help her get the gas, and then will ride with her all the way to San Diego back to his base where his ship is waiting for him. Now, she believes that with this naval guy riding with her, that she's going to be safer now, but she begins to talk about the reality of this hitchhiker she keeps seeing. Like, how does he always get ahead of her if she is driving on the freeway like this? And she's kind of eventually begins to let go of the concept, but he suddenly appears in front of them and she swerves to try to hit him, causing the sailor to take the wheel and claim that he didn't see anyone. And even as she keeps seeing the man on the side of the road, he still claims he's not seeing anything. And realizing that Nan might be a bit too dangerous to ride with, the sailor decides that he needs to get out of the car and find his own way to San Diego. And she even tries to convince the guy that she likes him and wants him to take her out on a date. And while he does stop for a second to think about that, he still decides that she's a little too crazy to deal with. So she pulls over to find a payphone to call someone that she knows to basically ease her concerns, to kind of get her mind off of everything. So she tries to call her mother back in New York City. But the woman who answers the phone says Nan's mother had a nervous breakdown from the death of her daughter by way of a car accident in Pennsylvania 6 days ago. And it all begins to make sense for Nan. The hitchhiker wasn't stalking her. It was the embodiment of death ushering her to the other side. All the fear, all the emotion, and everything that gave her life before has evaporated from her now. When she looks in the mirror under the shade in her car, instead of seeing herself, she sees the hitchhiker, saying that he believes that she is going his way. Now let's get to the 3 things I like about these episodes. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm giving 1 like per episode. First, in Living Doll, this is one of those all-time classic episodes of Twilight Zone that is often referenced to this day. In fact, one of my favorite segments of Simpsons Treehouse of Terror is the one with the killer Krusty doll that Bart gets for his birthday. And that is entirely based on and parroting the Talkie Tina of this episode. But Talkie Tina is one of the great Twilight Zone creations and characters. Her constant antagonizing of Telly Savalas is great. But what I'm actually giving my like to is Telly Savalas. Savalas was always a tough old bird in anything he appeared in. It's not always easy to read on what his take is on many of his characters. Is he a good guy? Is he a cranky old jerk? Is he a bad guy? Is he an anti-hero? He's an intense guy who oddly became kind of famous to a lot of people for always asking on TV, "Who loves you, baby?" with a big smile on his face. And so I really like Telly Savalas, and he's the best possible casting for playing this terribly insecure, small, awful stepfather who isn't exactly settling into his new family after marrying the presumably widowed Annabelle. And as much as Talkie Tina is a great Twilight Zone creation, Savalas is a great Twilight Zone performance full of anger, prickliness, and paranoia. It's a memorable rivalry between Savalas's Eric character and Talkie Tina in the grand history of great and memorable episodes for a great and memorable show. Now, second, there is kind of an existential horror to It's a Good Life that is absolute peak Twilight Zone. I'm sure the concept of Anthony as the origin of the horror of the story serves kind of 2 purposes. First, it's the misdirection of a normal old kid being a monster capable of pretty horrific things. I mean, that's just classic pulling the rug out from under you. However, the second source of horror is likely a play on how maybe parents or other adults around the child is almost trapped by the mere presence of the kid. And what I mean by that is that we are almost built to try to hide negative things from children to the point of bending over backwards to always make sure kids don't pick up any negativity from adults. Now imagine the mind prison created from our own desire to make sure kids only pick up positive things being imposed upon us by that kid instead, or those kids instead. So honestly, the thought of only being able to show positivity or thinking positive thoughts, even in the face of witnessing horrific things being conjured by a little boy who is basically only id with no maturity to understand what he's doing, I mean, that would be a total nightmare. I mean, it would drive you insane. And yeah, that's what we see at the end of this episode. There is no place for these people to go. Nothing exists outside this town. I mean, they are alone and they have to grow their own food. And when Anthony even makes it snow and ultimately making it impossible for all of these people to survive, they still have to tell him he did a good thing. I mean, it's like the constantly always having to say, well, my son is special or my kid is always a good kid, even when you know that he gave the other kid at the playground a black eye or threw a rock through your window at at the house. You're almost always trapped by saying he has to be a good kid and he's doing good things and we're proud of him. And even if they did survive and rationed what crops weren't destroyed by Anthony's sudden desire to have it snow, Anthony is learning no consequence for his actions. The adults will be trapped by always praising him until they eventually all either get jettisoned to the cornfield to die or be transformed into something monstrous. This is a fun episode, but one that makes you think about how horrific this existence really would be. Lastly, for the Hitch-Hiker, this is just great urban legend / campfire stuff here. Not only is there a great jump scare in the early in the episode when Nan drives off and the Hitch-Hiker suddenly steps in the frame looking at us as if to ask us for a ride, but this whole concept of a mysterious hitchhiker following a lonely driver in the middle of nowhere is inherently spooky. As I mentioned, there are two ways to tell the story. The first is the urban legend that a very similar story of a lady driver being menaced by a hitchhiker on the road asking for a ride wherever she goes in Creepshow 2 followed, where the driver committed a hit and run on the hitchhiker and she's haunted by that. And another element of her conscience is because she is hurrying home after cheating on her husband. I mean, that's the version of the spooky hitchhiker that has the driver doing something wrong and being held to account for it on a karmic level. The version of the spooky hitchhiker that this episode goes with is something that reminds me of one of my very favorite experimental horror films from roughly the same era, Carnival of Souls. This episode is a little bit before that, so I do wonder if Herc Harvey, the director of Carnival of Souls, took some inspiration here, because there is the same element of a woman on the road driving west being followed by basically a spectral guy along the road, only to discover later that she's kind of trapped in purgatory. I love this kind of idea. You have every reason to believe that this woman is being haunted by a ghost or perhaps a demon or devil or something else like that. You have lots of clues that she is even interacting with other people, that she is alive and well, and maybe cracking from being on this lonely road for such a long stretch. But you also have all the evidence needed, because one of the very first lines spoken is about how lucky she was that she survived the spin out in her car had. So we have all the evidence we need to know that she's also dead. Now, I love that kind of story, because while we always debate the presence of a soul, the idea of an afterlife or purgatory, or those last fleeting thoughts before you pass away, can make for compelling storytelling. This is one of the early episodes that is often listed among many fans' favorites or best episodes of the entire bunch. And I think it has all the atmosphere and tone and tension that it certainly earns those flowers that people give it. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers. We also upload that stuff to YouTube. And you can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. Next time, we are going to talk about a trio of Tales from the Dark Side episodes from the second half, the later part of its run. But until next week, stay spooky.